But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest.
To tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship.
Now, to go on to the word fascism, I would describe the type of government into which we have evolved as essentially fascist, yes.
It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Trust the experts, trust the experts. Trust the science, trust the science. CDC, CDC, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci. Mask on, mask off, 2 shots, 1 shot, mask on, 2 masks. Comply, comply.
Welcome to the Exit Your Matrix show, where we take the deep dive in search of truth. On the journey, we examine critical topics such as natural law, consciousness, morality, individual sovereignty, and the occult. And here's your host, Brad Villers. That's loud. Welcome to episode 14 of the Exit Your Matrix show. Today we'll be continuing our exploration of the techniques of mind control that we kicked off last week. But before we do that, we're now in section 6 of Lysander Spooner's Vices Are Not Crimes, a Vindication of Moral Liberty. Here we go. We all come into the world in ignorance of ourselves and of everything around us. By a fundamental law of our natures, we are all constantly impelled by the desire of happiness and the fear of pain. But we have everything to learn as to what will give us happiness and save us from pain. No two of us are wholly alike, either physically, mentally, or emotionally, or, consequently, in our physical, mental, or emotional requirements for the acquisition of happiness and the avoidance of unhappiness. No one of us, therefore, can learn this indispensable lesson of happiness and unhappiness, of virtue and vice, for another. Each must learn it for himself. To learn it, he must be at liberty to try all experiments that commend themselves to his judgment. Some of his experiments succeed, and because they succeed, are called virtues. Others fail, and because they fail, are called vices. He gathers wisdom as much from his failures as from his successes, from his so-called vices as from his so-called virtues. Both are necessary to his acquisition of that knowledge, of his own nature, and of the world around him, and of their adaptations or non-adaptations to each other, which shall show him how happiness is acquired and pain avoided. And, unless he can be permitted to try these experiments to his own satisfaction, he is restrained from the acquisition of knowledge and, consequently, from pursuing the great purpose and duty of his life. I find those to be some pretty wise words. So another item we get to before our topic today is that earlier today, actually, I was listening to The Matrix Revealed, which is the first of John Rappaport's 3 Matrix courses. I mentioned one last week. And as a quick aside, I'm only familiar with The Matrix Revealed, the first in those 3, but I can categorically tell you that if you're interested in truly learning about yourself, in really understanding the cosmos and your relation to it and just so much more, this is an absolutely invaluable tool, and I can tell you it will rock your world. You will come away with a totally different version of what you believe is actually going on. I fundamentally believe that. But in any case, we got into the topic of what John Rappaport sees as 3 states of consciousness, which are feedback consciousness, problem-solving consciousness, and creative consciousness. And I included excerpts last week on his discussion of feedback consciousness, which is the mindset of, I think he calls it checking in with the outside world to assess whether you're on the right track or not, which causes us to avoid punishment in the form of adherence to laws, man's laws, instead of seeking moral action. So really quickly, the second form of consciousness that Rappaport talks about is what he calls problem-solution consciousness. And this is back to that psychological impact of the Hegelian dialectic, or the problem-reaction-solution method that we talked about before, where the controllers orchestrate a problem to induce a specific emotional reaction. And it does need to be emotional, because when we're in an emotional state, we are in a lower state of vibration, a lower state of consciousness, and typically in a state of fear. And that is the worst possible state we can be in to make decisions. But in any case, the third piece of that is that a proposal is presented, which is a solution to the problem that they have presented. And this really is just the end of accomplishing what their goals are. The actual solution ends up being what they were hoping for. It either accomplishes or furthers their goals. But in his discussion of creative consciousness, it really hit home with me. And this was the third type of consciousness he discussed. And it was really hard to cut anything that he said, but I patched together what I think are the most powerful portions of that, so take a listen.
The fantastic upside of creative consciousness. And that's what I really want to get into on this state of consciousness. Creative consciousness is that state in which it becomes apparent that a human being is a creator who can create without limit, and therefore can make arise spontaneously that which was not there before, ever, anywhere, at any time. From a platform of freedom, exemplifying power, self-sufficiency, self-realization, expanded consciousness. And in those moments when all of that was apparent to me simultaneously, not through just thinking about it, but actually perceiving it, that's a great moment. That's an amazing thing. It's a fantastic thing. The aspect of being able to perceive a creation and see it for what it actually is, completely devoid of all of the crap and the baggage and the ideology and the punditry and the commentary and the history of it. In that state, one begins to see that many of the, just as an example, many of the false and cruel institutions under which we live could be changed completely, could exist in entirely different ways or not at all. That certain innovations could be invoked which would change life on the planet in extremely rapid and beneficial ways for large numbers of people. But one is going to have a passion for the new, the unknown, the never before done, the created, the adventure, the fantasticness of creating something new, of changing reality. And one is going to have an intimate knowledge of what freedom is truly all about, because it is with a sense of inner freedom that gives one the range of infinite choice in what one is going to create, and in the outer freedom of living in a society which has been built in such a way that one can create freely. You see, one gains a new respect and a new feeling of freedom must be maintained. Real freedom. All right, with that kind of passion for change, what are we talking about in terms of the world and the muddle that it is in? Obviously, we are talking about, if many people are in that state of consciousness, we are talking about many people now that are extremely motivated with great energy to bring about a new reality, a new perception, a new awareness of something better.
So last week we covered the first two techniques of mind control, which are obfuscation and worldview poisoning. And a really quick recap there. Obfuscation is a technique intended to make concepts of freedom, justice, and morality, completely obscure and to overcomplicate any topics in the minds of the target. The definition of obfuscation is to render obscure, unclear, unintelligible, bewildering, or confusing. And we discussed the obfuscation of simplicity with complexity, and in that state where we believe that a topic is too complex and can never be understood, so we'll likely abandon it because of that. And our attention is drawn to what we have been told, and thus we believe to be more important things. We also covered the obfuscation of principles, which are the foundations for natural law and moral law, with laws, meaning man's law. We need to understand that laws are simply written preferences of a particular group of people at a particular point in time, and the fact that they require enforcement is a dead giveaway that they're a fraud. Because real laws that actually govern the cosmos need no enforcement or involvement from any third party. They just are, and they just do, because they are real. We also saw how this was connected to the obfuscation of dominion with the fear of punishment. In a state of dominion, the conditions are set for us to create alignment among our thoughts, emotions, and actions, which is that trinity of our consciousness. But in a state of fear, the conditions are set for us to make the worst possible decisions because, as I mentioned, fear is the lowest vibration and lowest level of consciousness possible. So we also looked at the obfuscation of gnosis with belief, and gnosis being a very special kind of knowledge that is acquired through experience, not just learning or reading or watching videos or whatever the form might be, but actually experiencing it in life. And that is true knowledge. But belief, on the other hand, is a palatable word for unexamined dogma that we have been fed by someone else. And as I've said before, oftentimes are the beliefs that we haven't even concluded that they are our beliefs. We've literally just inherited them from others over the course of our education and the indoctrination we receive from our parents and the like. Obfuscation of individuality with culture. We discussed the destruction of the unique qualities of the individual in favor of conformity with culture, which is the extinguishing and the extinguishment of the imagination. We then went into the second technique of mind control, which is worldview poisoning. This is degradation of the way one sees oneself and one in relation to others in the world. This included the nature versus nurture argument that we discussed, and we probed into two key items. And the first is the concept of human nature one that has been entirely warped from being properly understood as a simple and basic set of self-preservation instincts that we have? So we cry when hungry, for example, to falsely perceived as a governing and unchangeable force within us for our entire lives. And second, the term human nature aside, we have been handed alleged authorities to intentionally present humans as dark and sinister, in need of institutions like religion to save them and government to control them. Getting us to go along with immoral behavior is easy when we've been convinced that we, ourselves, and others are worthless. Our desensitization dulls us, and our sense of morality with it. Our sense of righteous indignation and the outcry that might otherwise result is tamped down. And how do we place value on human beings? We're told its accomplishments, its appearance, possessions, especially money, but their morality, the alignment of their decisions with natural law, that is what defines humans' value. This is the devaluing worldview. And this brings us to the subject of creating oneself, of understanding that we are not of a predefined quality or nature. We absolutely have the ability to make changes within us and then in the world around us. The controllers don't want you to think it, but change is possible. Almost certainly not easy. It requires an act of will, and you have to care about it. But that all-important condition of the mind is the prerequisite to acquiring, processing, and putting the appropriate knowledge into action to become an example for others. So the convergence of will care, and intelligence will lead to change-focused action in the world. When we do, we begin to know ourselves, and the motto, "Know thyself," gives us the perfect language to realize the importance of understanding who we are. The following, for example, is inscribed at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. "I warn you, whoever you are, you want to probe the arcana of nature, that if you do not find within yourself that which you are looking for, you shall not find it outside either. If you ignore the wonders of your own house, how do you pretend to find other wonders? Within you is the hidden treasure of treasures. Know thyself, and you will know the universe and the gods." Always keep in mind that those who would wish to have you act in a way that is beneficial to them, while outwardly expressing that it's beneficial to you, they heed and live that inscription. You can't accuse them of not spending their time and paying their attention to the power of an in-depth knowledge of the human being. You can hurl all the insults and accusations at them you want, and rightly so, but failing to see the relationship between what they value and what the average person values, and then the resulting outcomes each of them experiences, is dangerous to your personal sovereignty and freedom at large. Why is this possible? Why would badly intentioned people and institutions be allowed to flourish? Because, for better or worse, the universe respects care over no care, and it respects unity over no unity. And what do you see from these nefarious groups and the controllers? Care and unity. And what do you see from the public at large? Lack of care and no unity. Occult knowledge is the ultimate leverage, which is why those people are such a small group, yet can exert such control. So today we're moving into the next two techniques of mind control, the exploitation of primal fears and the strategy of divide and conquer, divide and rule. These are ancient techniques, having existed since the dawn of man and carried through our deeply seated and very real collective experience and memory. So let's talk about these primal fears, and then we'll also be talking about how they are interconnected and practically function as one. So the first, and this may sound strange and perhaps trivial, but it's the fear of darkness. Our ancestors relied on the sun and the light from it. This was their natural protection from predators that often hunt at night, whereas a human is vulnerable given the lack of night vision. And you can see and go back into the writings, and the sun was actually considered to be a god. It's no secret. And in those times, and without the technology that is virtually impossible for us to conceive not having, the setting sun was anxiety-inducing. That was going to be the end of the light. And without the sun's warmth, food, and other life that supported it, they would fail and they would starve. It's not hard to understand then that the sun became a god, as I mentioned. It was a savior that arrived each morning. That's how they saw it, and that's how they experienced it. So the fear of darkness is imprinted in the human psyche at a level we do not understand. Of greatest importance is what we know our controllers are aware of, and they're aware of this. They study it. They engage organizations with very sophisticated methodologies to research it, and they use it. So the second primal fear is the fear of predators. So we have to examine this one with perspectives of then and now. So then, meaning prior to the advent of technology, including effective weapons, humans were a much more frequent meal for predators. As I mentioned, these animals had night vision and innate hunting skills that we weren't a match for, and physically wouldn't be able to protect ourselves from. So you fast forward to now, and our fear is of the predatory person. Unfortunately, for good reason, due to the dynamics of a particular location, we've developed a mindset that we have to go into self-protection mode for fear of being taken advantage of. So if we are in a specific place that we feel is high crime or there might be danger, we go into that mode. And the predator is not anything that is in the nature of things and in the natural environment, but it's created through other human beings and through their behavior. And the predators are not just physical. And in fact, the predatory behavior most of us have experienced is not a threat to our person, but with examples like attempting to scam us financially or steal our identities. In the end, we're on edge, and that fear of being preyed upon becomes a lever controllers can push. And why? Because most people will accept and even seek a level of control exerted over them so that they don't have to take that very real responsibility for themselves and their own well-being. So as I've said before many times, this is the trade of our natural rights gifted to us by creation to someone else for comfort, but specific to this topic, safety. From terrorists, from carbon dioxide, from mass shootings, from Russia, and of course from
China now, China. You know, China.
The third primal fear is the fear of abandonment, and specifically fear of abandonment by the alpha male figure. And before you scoff at this and keep your conventional thinking about yourself and who you are, how many people do you think are interested and would understand the value of taking back the responsibility for themselves in its entirety? And of that paltry number, what percentage do you think have the skills to even attempt that? This is probably an oversimplistic example, but think Little House on the Prairie. So I happened to catch an episode or two of Little House on the Prairie recently, and I just thought the lessons were amazing. I had forgotten how poignant they actually were. But one episode had one of the characters, the main little girl, and she was out fishing with her dog. Kind of a snooty banker came by in a carriage, a horse pulling it, of course, and the girl's dog was aggravating the horse, caused the horse to basically bolt off and run into a tree. And the banker said to the little girl, he said, "Well, I'm going to go tell the sheriff about this." And she said, "Well, that's going to be pretty hard, mister, because there's no sheriff in this county." So I loved that. And there was another example where Mr. Ingalls, Charles Ingalls, I guess is his name, the main character, he was supposed to perform some work, had signed an agreement that he could have property of his repossessed if he didn't complete the work. He was hurt. He asked for a little bit of extra time, but the other party was really being a hard ass about it. And so, long story short, he ended up trying to do the work even though he was hurt. He had broken ribs. He was barely able to do it. But it was kind of like a scene out of Witness, the barn raising scene, where once a few people started to see what he was struggling with, they all started to come help, got everything done. And then I thought this was the best part. They were all looking down their nose at the other party, who was a merchant in town that he was supposed to do the work for. And he was trying to justify his actions and trying to talk to the people, and they didn't want to have anything to do with him. And so that, in my opinion, is a pretty good example of how natural law actually works. You treat somebody unfairly, don't be reasonable with them, and those actions will come back to you from the very population around you. So related to that, there's been a resurgence around interest in growing food and homesteading, but it's still a trivial number of people who would even think of doing such a thing. For everyone else, there's Uber Eats. Now this is the mindset of a tentative, controllable person who has been manipulated into understanding no other condition than being at the mercy of others. The fourth primal fear, the fear of chaos. So the lights have gone out, there are predators among us, and Daddy abandoned us, so he's not around to protect us. So what are we certain to face? Play a word game with anyone around you and ask them what they think the term means for no controllers, no rulers, and I bet every answer you get will be freedom. Yet ask them what word they associate with anarchy, and they're sure to say chaos. Yet anarchy, of course, as we know, means no rulers, no controllers. So how can that not be the result? We damn sure don't have the ability to protect ourselves. And here's the truly inconvenient truth. Freedom has the potential for danger and even chaos by definition. But I'd urge you to remember the words of Thomas Jefferson. I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. And do not be fooled. What we actually are experiencing is not peace. It's just a covert form of chaos. When people are indoctrinated from childhood, can't think for themselves, trust and obey any authority figure they're exposed to, and will go so far as to advocate for the death of others because they dare to disagree and express their own opinion, that, folks, is chaos. And would some chaos really be that bad for us? Would that lead to gnosis, knowledge of what behavior creates freedom and order, and what behavior creates slavery and chaos, which is natural law? Could the short-term suffering that we would experience be far less than what is experienced now on an ongoing and seemingly never-ending basis? This is the evolution of fear, which causes the condition of confusion within us, and then we use control in an attempt to create order, but it only leads to more chaos. Chaos cannot create order, ever. And our awareness of this exposes the fake controllers, those who think they hold the power. As I've called them before, they're the trash collectors. Every single one of the people you ever see claiming any authority or control over others is an order giver, but they're also most certainly order followers. They sold their souls and learned how to buy others. Could we call that dark gnosis? But what about such a disorderly idea as order out of chaos? The fact is that order will eventually emerge from chaos. When an individual is in a state of chaos and confusion, the only thing that will bring them out of that is more chaos, because it requires them to surrender their ego and acknowledge that they can't tolerate it any longer. It's just become unbearable. And this applies to the whole, not just any individual. Humanity can yield, or be forced to yield, the collective egoic self. The most important thing to take from this, and from these 4 primal fears, is that they are all directly related to survival. The instinct to survive is the strongest instinct we have. Our fear around not being able to see for lack of light, fear of predators, fear of lacking a father figure to protect us, and a fear of chaos breaking out are all rooted in survival. And you know the controllers know that. You know they go to extraordinary lengths to keep knowledge hidden and then corrupt that knowledge through their action so that they can own you. And keep in mind that dark occult ideology has as its primary tenet, self-preservation is the highest law. This is a mind control technique, and it works through the exploitation of our most primal fears. Occult controllers know this and are very effective at creating behavior they prefer and is in their interests. Before we move on, let me again urge you to get Mark Passio's amazing repository of knowledge, or what he calls the ARC drive. This is 2 terabytes of his selections from his much, much larger personal collection of books, audio, and video. And I am not exaggerating at all when I say that with a mind that's in a state of receptivity, this information could change your beliefs, certainly, and could change you in the process. And it certainly has changed me. So here we go with mind control technique number 4, the strategy of divide and conquer, divide and rule. So let's take a look at what Wikipedia has to say about divide and conquer, or what they call divide and rule. And keep in mind that I do include some thoughts from Wikipedia. It's one of the most commonly used sources, so I do it for that reason. But understand, I'm well aware of issues around Wikipedia. I'm very cautious using it, but I also think that they hide some things in plain sight, and there's some very revealing information in some of their entries. So let's take a look. Divide and rule policy, or divide and conquer, in politics and sociology is gaining and maintaining power divisively. Historically and presently, this strategy was and is used in many different ways by empires seeking to expand their territories. However, it has been hard to distinguish between the exploitation of pre-existing divisions by opponents and the deliberate creation or strengthening of these divisions implied by divide and rule. Elements of this technique involve creating or encouraging divisions among the subjects to prevent alliances that could challenge the sovereign and distributing forces that they overpower the other. I can't say that that is written terribly well. All right, second, aiding and promoting those who are willing to cooperate with the sovereign, meaning the state. Third, fostering distrust and enmity between local rulers. And fourth, encouraging meaningless expenditures that reduce the capability for political and military spending. The effect here is keeping people focused on perceived differences among them, because when it's accomplished, those people are much easier to control. The public must think of themselves as separate and different, never seeing their shared humanity and experience with any clarity. In that state, their weaknesses will be pronounced and exploited. The controllers have been perfecting this for thousands of years and are so effective at it now, they control us through the fear of shaming and ostracism. So they don't have to lift a finger because, shamefully, we willingly and even enthusiastically do it to ourselves, with help from parents, teachers, and everyone else who interacts primarily with young people. We have to realize that we're in the same predicament, maybe best described as being fellow inmates. We all have the same basic desires and fears and needs, and we're all suffering from the same mechanisms of control. So we'll never bring the collective consciousness into alignment until we can first get past perceived differences among us. Yet isn't it interesting how much we're taught to worship the differences and our uniqueness rather than the things we share in common? Any chance that's intentional? Any possibility that our controllers know exactly how that operates and are easily manipulated into first being divided or categorized, then into fighting with other groups? And here are some ways in which we see ourselves as different. Male versus female. Now, we do live, and I acknowledge we live in a male-dominated condition. And that's a shame, because that should not be that way. And there is no spiritual difference between males and females. Both sexes have the male left brain and female right brain energies, and they should both be exhibited in unison and harmony with one another. This melding of these two aspects of human beings is called the chemical wedding. It's the balance I've been talking about so much, where these two hemispheres of the brain complement one another. They come together rather than one dominating the other. And these notions of what a man should be and how he should act and what a woman should be and how she should act constantly have to be reinforced. Number 2, age. Age is stratified in many ways, but the most prevalent method for mind control is by generation, right? How many times do we hear of generations over the years having conflict with one another and being at one another's throats? Is that natural, or is there any chance that that is provoked and somehow orchestrated? Number 3, class. What do you do? Where do you live? What kind of car do you drive? What kind of clothes do you wear? And let's not forget that money is the number one religion in the world. And all of those questions I cited beat around that income bush, right? We're all trying to figure out how much does the other person make, how much money do they have. 4th, race. One of the greatest accomplishments in the work of our controllers is to divide us along racial lines. It's the same concept as consciousness. We're simultaneously unique and part of a greater. It's a complete illusion and only exists for the purpose of manipulating people. Number 5, nationality. We see this in the signs of nationalistic pride and nationalism. My country is better than yours. No, my country is better than yours. I mean, it's insanity. Number 6, politics. This is the process of picking your master. And yes, there are still people who believe there is a difference between Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. But even a cursory investigation would lay open the fact that this is a false choice. Each faction just gives just enough PR spin and just the right sound bites to make it seem as if they're different, exactly as it was designed. And I'd say this is the most difficult one for most people, and it's because of the need for it to actually function as advertised. And why? Why is it so important? If we weren't given politics, what other way would we convince ourselves that we actually have a voice, or are even in any way involved, or even associated with how our governance operates? Letting go would lay bare the truth that politics may pay lip service to it being some construct having to do with representation, but it's simply a deception that induced us to trade our sovereignty. With these named and understanding how they operate, do you believe that your controllers respect you? That they want the best for you? From what I've read and heard, they laugh at you, at us. Recall the words of that grand statesman and recipient of the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize, Henry Kissinger. Military men are just dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns in foreign policy. The elderly are useless eaters. So that'll do it for the exploitation of primal fears and the strategy of divide and conquer, divide and rule. I hope you'll join me next time when we take on the next 2 methods of mind control, indoctrination and controlled opposition. And I want to leave you with some words from someone I quoted early in some of my shows, but I haven't lately, and I really needed to fix that because that's just a shame. This is one of the most insightful voices on the subject of the dynamics behind mankind's willingness to enslave oneself. This is why men born under the yoke and then nourished and reared in slavery are content, without further effort, to live in their native circumstance, unaware of any other state or right, and considering as quite natural the condition to which they were born. There is, however, no heir so spendthrift or indifferent that he does not sometimes scan the account books of his father in order to see if he is enjoying all the privileges of his legacy, or whether, perchance, his rights and those of his predecessor have not been encroached upon. Nevertheless, it is clear enough that the powerful influence of custom is in no respect more compelling than in this, namely, habituation to subjugation. Thanks for being with me. I hope to see you next time, and remember to always do your own thinking. Until then, be well.